Now, I think that brands are in a place where they've had to really get comfortable with giving up so much more control and recognizing that, like, you don't own your brand solely. Like, you have to release it into other people's platforms and voices and be comfortable knowing that, like, part of how you're going to grow is through other people talking about you, and you can't fully control what they're going to say. But without that, it's a much, much longer path to success.
I'm Sammi Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. What do Casper and Allbirds have in common, besides defining the direct-to-consumer boom? They all worked with branding agency Red Antler before they were household names. And my guest today, Red Antler's co-founder Emily Heyward, was behind the brands that changed how we shop, scroll, and connect with companies. In this episode, Emily breaks down the real work of branding, why it's about more than logos or taglines, and how the smartest companies bake strategy into their DNA before launch day. She shares how Red Antler grew from a tiny agency with big ideas into the go-to branding partner for VC darlings and cultural juggernauts. We talk about the playbook of Red Antler's early clients, risks she's taken that have paid off, and whether AI will replace branding agencies. Plus, Emily shares her take on investing through Red Antler's VC habitat partners, what makes a great agency founder fit, and how to stay creative when everything is moving at warp speed. This is Emily Heyward, Social Currency. So Emily, welcome to Social Currency.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Red Antler has become one of the most well-known and iconic branding agencies in the US. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to co-found Red Antler?
Absolutely. So I started my career working in traditional advertising. I was at big global agencies working on large national TV campaigns. That was the focus of my work in the early days. And won't bore you with the whole long story, but reunited with a friend who I had met at my very first job, a guy called JB Osborne. He had been hired by a New Zealand-based agency to start their New York office and brought me along to do it with him. And over the course of a year, with very few contacts, very little experience, we started meeting entrepreneurs. And it came about very organically. People would say, oh, you're starting an agency? My friend is starting a business that, helps you find a dentist through a website, things like that. And we just started to realize there was this new generation of businesses popping up. No one was really talking about it. Nobody was talking about the startup scene. It was just happening like sort of amongst us. So eventually we parted ways with the New Zealand company because they had a different agenda. They were really looking to, get big budget accounts, and started Red Antler with the focus of really being the first creative services company that was designed to partner directly with founders and help them figure out how they could launch in the most high impact way possible.
So it sounds like from the early days, your specific focus was early stage founders, or were you looking at all stages of companies?
In the early days, we were working strictly with pre-launch businesses. Okay. So we were partnering with founders who had an idea and, a way to build that idea. It wasn't like so early that it was just hey, I might start a business doing X, Y, Z. But yeah, we would help them over the course of a number of months sort of crystallize their idea into a brand strategy and then bring it to life through whatever it was they needed to go into the world with. And I think that because of that, we were incredibly holistic from the start. Our vision was not, let's start a web design company or a packaging design company. It was, what does this brand need to connect with its consumers? Like, what are all the pieces that it needs to put together to launch and then continue to scale and grow? As our reputation grew, we started getting introduced to later stage startups. And for that was like a big moment. Like, I remember when Foursquare reached out, I was like, oh my God, like
Foursquare.
This business that I've heard of wants to work with us. So that was sort of the next phase for us of growth.
So it sounds like you started very early stage. It then transitioned to companies that were a little bit further along. And what would you say was the turning point for Red Antler to go from these very early stage companies landing a few bigger clients to, wow, we have really made it?
I think that actually, first of all, we still work with pre-launch businesses, and it's not like we were working with the pre-launch businesses with the goal that we could like grow up and win bigger clients. Like we still love working with pre-launch businesses. It's a huge part of our business and that's never going to go away. I think the turning point for us was actually when some of those pre-launch businesses became household names. Because in the beginning, we were new, our clients were new. I'd be like, meeting some friend of my parents and they'd be like, what clients do you work on? And I'm like, you haven't heard of any of them. Yeah. But once we started to see success in our clients, that led to success for us because I could answer that question at a cocktail party and be like, oh, One Kings Lane. And people were like, I love One Kings Lane.
Yeah. I first heard about Red Antler in the mid-2010s. And it was very apparent that your company had really this foothold with a very trendy direct-to-consumer darling of the time. And direct-to-consumer, I've covered this a ton on my page because I find it fascinating. It was an era into itself, and times have certainly changed. But I think that a lot of people look back very fondly on how brands captivated people's lives. And there was this collective fascination on the branding part specifically. So thinking back to that time period, what was the secret sauce that Red Antler had that made it so great at building these brands?
Yeah, that was a wild time period. And I think that you are not alone. Like, I think that that was an era where we definitely sort of reached broad awareness, kind of riding that wave of the direct-to-consumer boom. So what's interesting for me is like we've kind of been there for every big wave in startup culture, like long before direct to consumer. Like we did a bunch of email newsletter brands when that was the big thing, and then we did flash sale businesses. So for us, direct to consumer was sort of one more era in a long line of us sort of being at the forefront of innovative business models. But in terms of the secret sauce, I think what was so special about the direct-to-consumer era is that you had a lot of businesses in categories that had often been overlooked or had grown stale or maybe never really thought about the power of brand building at all. I mean, mattresses are a perfect example of that. And these businesses were thinking, like, there's got to be a better way. Like, why do we have to go to a mattress showroom on our Saturday and like spend, 2 minutes lying on like 8 different beds and still have no idea which one we want to buy? Like, and it was, of course, that whole cut out the middleman. We're going to, give the savings back to you. There's so much markup. Like, let's remove overhead. So I think there was a lot of value, some real, some maybe purported, that was being given back to the consumer. And it created this kind of like mutual love fest where consumers loved these brands showed up like they loved their customers, and everybody was like incredibly optimistic about this new era of shopping. I think obviously a lot of those promises didn't last. And I think we've actually entered a phase, which we can talk more about, of like extreme cynicism across the board. But when I look back at that era, like people were really excited about brands.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a point that I feel very strongly about, which was, well, first, the cynicism that we're in now. But second, I think what was part of the magic with direct to consumer was that these businesses were identifying a weak point or a point that just didn't make sense. If we're going back to the mattress example, right? Going to a mattress store doesn't make sense in today's day and age when we have the internet. So at the time, these ideas were novel. I agree with you. I think it was really special because there were true opportunities that these businesses identified. And Red Antler, of course, rode that wave in adding some fuel or gasoline to these already like really cool ideas.
Definitely. And I think that where we were able to play a role, when Casper came to us, like we immediately got it. Yeah. Like a lot of investors, even who met with Casper, was like, mattresses? No one cares about their mattress. Like we met those founders and we were like, of course you should be building a beloved brand in this space where there is none. And I think what we were able to bring to the table alongside, their work coming up with this innovative business model and this great mattress was like can a mattress brand show up in a way that you would never have expected a mattress brand to show up? Like, can it be funny? Can we focus on like what you're doing during the day versus just showing the same generic stock photos of people like, asleep in a dark room? Like, we turned the entire vernacular on its head.
Totally. And actually, one thing that sticks out to me, and this is actually something I think about a lot, was some of the ideas that these companies had at the time to brand themselves and differentiate themselves in the market. And one of them, for Casper specifically, was branding themselves as the Nike of sleep. And I think now, obviously, we laugh. The market has certainly changed a lot, but that's a line where at the time, people were actually nodding their heads saying, yes, this could be the Nike of sleep. And let's create this whole sleep consumer culture and economy. And it's just really funny to think back on.
Yes, I still feel like everyone wants to be the Nike of something or the Apple of something. There's just Nike and Apple.
Yes.
Class of their own, folks.
So we've talked a lot about the wins and successes, especially in the early days of Red Antler. Can you tell us about some challenges that Red Antler faced in those early days?
Yeah, it was interesting. So in some ways, we had amazing, I always get tailwinds and headwinds confused. Tailwinds?
Yes.
That's the good one, right?
Yes. It's like pushing the plane forward. That's how I think about it. Yes.
It's counterintuitive to me somehow. Clearly, I'm not a sailor. We had great tailwinds because we were one of the only games in town. But that also meant we had the challenge of convincing people that what we were doing was even necessary to begin with. So we faced a lot of pushback, particularly from investors. I think founders tended to get it. They were like, I do need help with all these things. Like, I have to figure out who my target audience is and how I connect with them. But investors had not quite wrapped their heads around the fact that pre-launch companies should be spending money on branding. It was kind of like, it was still the days of the lean startup. It was like, get it out there. The buzzword was iterate, like test your way to success, find product market fit, then worry about things like branding. Whereas our thesis was, the sooner you invest in brand, the more set up for success you'll be. We actually had this phrase we'd use back then, brand early, not often. And that was kind of our mantra. It was like, if you get it right, everything that follows will be smoother, faster, and easier. Now, I think we're living in an era where everybody does understand that branding is important. Like, we're not having to convince people of why we exist, but that also means we have a lot more competition.
Do you feel as if the Red Antler strategy, and perhaps it's part of the strategy today that you're sharing with brands that are in your portfolio who are earlier stage, do you feel as if the branding strategies change when you are now looking at an ecosystem in the creator economy where you can't just be an Instagram only company? You need to be an Instagram, a TikTok, a YouTube. You probably should also be investing in other forms of connecting with your communities, right? So do you think that Red Antler's strategy has changed to where we are today?
Absolutely. And it needs to continue to change. I think that the principles of what makes a successful brand have largely remained the same, but I think the ways that brands need to show up and how they need to think about building their world is constantly evolving. And if we, rewind back to that era, back then, like, it was actually affordable to acquire customers on, it wasn't Meta, but like Instagram. It was almost this like silver bullet because not a lot of brands had caught on to it yet and they weren't playing there. So like, you actually could make the math work of like spending on advertising on those platforms and acquiring customers that way. That did not last long. And I think now we're living in an era where if your strategy for growth is strictly paid marketing on Meta, like, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Like, that is really, really difficult, if not impossible. So you speak of the creator economy. There was no conversation about a creator economy in 2016. Like, there was no discussion of influencers. Like, this was not really part of how brands were going to market. It was mostly about just like pure paid. Now, I think that brands are in a place where they've had to really get comfortable with giving up so much more control and recognizing that like you don't own your brand solely. Like you have to release it into other people's platforms and voices and be comfortable knowing that like part of how you're going to grow is through other people talking about you, and you can't fully control what they're going to say. But without that, it's a much, much longer path to success.
Yes. And I have a question for you on user-generated content that we're going to get to in a bit, but I could not agree with you more. I think so often with influencers, right? They receive these packages from brands. They're incentivized to post about it on their page. Some are positive, but some are negative. And I think the world that we live in today also moves so quickly. The media cycle is faster than ever before. And I feel like brands who are proactive versus reactive are the ones that can stay ahead, but it's really difficult.
It's really hard. And I think if you look at brands that are succeeding right now, you're absolutely right. They're so quick to like put out new content, respond to what's happening in culture. Like the days of spending sort of 8 months on your next campaign strategy, like that is over. By the time you launch it, everyone's moved on to the next thing.
Now, looking back, I'm curious to see if Red Antler took any strategic risks early on that impacted the growth of the company.
Positively or negatively?
Both.
Okay. Well, I think that our core premise was a strategic risk because, again, nobody was really talking about the importance of branding for startups. And we got a lot of sort of funny looks, like startups, like they don't have any money. So I think that alone was a risk. I think that we also took a risk that really benefited us in the early days, which was that we did not spend time building a network among our peers. We built a network among startups and VCs. Like we were not, it's funny, for years and years and years, like startups and VCs knew who we were and other agencies had never heard of us.
Wow.
And like we were just not on the radar of our own industry. I think that benefited us really well, like in the early days, because we were growing an incredibly powerful network among our potential clients. And all of our initial growth was through word of mouth and referral, and to this day still mostly is. That being said, I do think we reached a point where we recognized that it was important to also like form a community amongst our peers, partly for recruiting reasons. I think that's a big piece of it. And also, being able to diversify our client type and not only be showing up in the rooms where everyone kind of already knew us.
And so Red Antler works with companies from pre-launch to growth and enterprise level companies. So I'm really curious to hear about some of the challenges of working with more established companies versus startups, because in my mind, established companies have it a little bit harder in that they already have a reputation. Consumers will probably know who they are versus startups, which is pretty much a blank canvas.
Definitely. I mean, in some ways, that reputation is helpful, right? Like you're not trying to get attention from zero and get people to sort of notice this thing that they've never heard of before. And I think obviously established companies have greater scale, more resources, more money to spend. In some ways, they can actually afford to take more risk because it's not like this is our very last dollar and like if it doesn't work, we're toast. I find actually the greatest challenges are internal. I think that it's around sort of internal decision making, making sure that the ultimate decision makers are like in the room at the right time, not getting trapped in like a cycle of bureaucracy. I have this phrase that I've shared with clients that I call corporate chutes and ladders, where it's like you're like climbing up the ladder and everyone's approving everything, and then like the boss sees it and you get like bumped back down to level one, which not only is obviously like frustrating and defeating, but it truly leads to worse work.
Yeah.
Because by the time you're like in your second, third go round, like that is not going to be your like freshest, most, powerful thinking.
And I'd imagine that these enterprise or further developed companies, if we want to call them that, generally take a longer period of time to make decisions versus a startup, which is scrappier, leaner, and can make decisions quickly.
Definitely. And you have to just account for that, right? Like we run a different process for our more established businesses. And there's a lot of incredible advantages to working with more established businesses too. I mean, in some ways, they've been more trained on how to be a client. Like most of them have been through a creative process before, whereas a lot of our startup founders have like never done this before. So they don't necessarily know how to give creative feedback or like what's going to be most constructive and productive in the room. So it's not for me a clear cut like, oh, this one is preferable or more fun. Like there really are pros and cons. And for me, I actually love the range. Like I think that, I love working with pre-launch startups. Like it's a huge part of my daily life, but it's also really exciting to sort of be met with the scale and ambition of a large global company.
I'm curious because obviously there's such a broad range in companies, in stage of growth, in funding levels. And in order to work with a branding agency, first, there's a huge amount of creativity and there's a structured process, and you're dealing with people who are really putting a lot of thought and effort into what this brand will develop into and look like. So how does Red Antler think about pricing or packages on different levels of a company's growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like, oh, you're bigger, so we're going to charge you more. With the larger companies, it takes longer. Yeah. There are more stakeholders. No matter what they say, they're not going to make decisions in the room.
Yeah.
There's more internal selling that needs to happen. We probably need to staff it differently. We need to support it differently. We probably need more client service. So all of that costs us money. So, we have structured our pricing in a way that I think we're on the more premium end for a pre-launch startup, but certainly there's plenty of clients who recognize the value that we bring and have decided that it's worth it to maybe spend a little more than if they just hired a freelancer. And then, as projects increase in complexity, which is usually driven by scale of client, our pricing goes up.
So last year, I covered a story about Habitat Partners, which is the venture capital firm that Red Antler started. I also read that Habitat Partners raised a $31 million fund. So tell me more about the investment thesis and the reason why you decided to go into this venture fund.
Absolutely. So I think everyone can agree the world does not just like need another venture fund for the sake of it. And we were very conscious of that too. And it had been something that for years and years, people were like, you should raise a venture fund. And we were like, we're going to wait until this really makes sense, until the time is right, until we know that we can do it in a way that is differentiated from what else is out there. So early days of the business, from literally day one, we had been taking sweat equity in some of our startup clients. And it was a way for us to like bring down our fees and also align incentives and feel like we're all sort of working towards the same goal. We, as the years went on, saw some great successes from that strategy, then started balance sheet investing. So, just through Red Antler, there were times that we'd like write a small check into a client's business if it made sense, or even sometimes businesses that were not hiring us on the services side, but, wanted us involved and we believed in them and saw that we could add value. So that was a whole era that led to us thinking, okay, this is going really well. We've proven that we can get into rounds that other people can't get into because people want the additional service layer that's tied to Red Antler. We've also proven that we have access to businesses that other people just aren't seeing because people are coming to Red Antler and because of the network that we've built. And at that moment, it just felt very organic to, get more real about the whole thing. And that's when Habitat was born. So the thesis behind Habitat, I think it's about half the Habitat portfolio ends up being a Red Antler client. It's not a total overlap. But the idea is no matter what, whether it's a client or not, we're in a unique position to bring value beyond the check. And there are plenty of Habitat portfolio businesses that are not Red Antler clients, but I'm still spending a ton of time with those founders. Sometimes even helping them choose an agency, certainly like reviewing work, working with their creative director, giving advice, reviewing their new campaign. And additionally, we have an amazing network that we're also bringing to the table. So some of the Habitat investments, their clients are our clients. Like if it's, let's say it's a SaaS business that's sort of going after startups, or, creative businesses or whatever it might be, we're able to make introductions in a way that just like a classic standard VC might not be able to.
How do you get connected to those companies that aren't already working with Red Antler?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's through the network that we've built. So we have a lot of incredible friends in the VC community. And if they're looking at a deal where they think that we could add unique value, like they'll often bring us into it. We're not in a place where we're leading rounds. So we play really nicely with everybody, and we'll often get brought in as this like extra added value partner. Sometimes it's through clients. Sometimes it's also a conversation starts and it becomes clear that like Red Antler might not be the right fit, but it does make sense for Habitat. So that's also sometimes a path where it's like, look, it doesn't make sense for you to work with us right now on the Red Antler side, but like we believe in what you're doing. We'd love to invest. And often those end up becoming Red Antler clients like down the road.
And can you share some of the companies that are in your current portfolio under Habitat?
I'll name a couple. So Figure Robotics is like one that's doing just phenomenally well. That business is absolutely exploding in a good way. Yeah. Papa Bagels.
Yeah.
On the non-Red Antler client side, we invested in an amazing Japanese skincare brand recently called Dam Dam. We've done a lot of skincare. We like love skincare. On the B2B front, awesome business called Motion that's sort of in the realm of creative strategy and optimizing creative assets. So they provide software that help marketers like continue to see what assets are performing best and continue to optimize. So there was like a really natural fit there because, we understand that world really well. We're able to make introductions for them. And they now are actually becoming a Red Antler client. But that was at least a year after we started our relationship with them.
Got it. Yeah, I feel like once they probably see and have worked with you and the team at Habitat, they probably are more inclined to work with you on different areas of the business.
It's also just a timing question. Like businesses are not always like at the exact moment in time where it makes sense to kind of reinvest in their brand. And then the time came and yes, we already had a relationship and it was like a natural progression.
So Red Antler has seen companies across basically every or most industry at this point and all stages of growth. So my next question is, what makes an iconic, obsession-worthy brand today?
I think the principles are the same as they've been the whole time we've been in business, but how you go about it continues to change. So for me, it's always about whatever category you're in. It could be like the driest, most like B2B, like, nobody spends their day thinking about that category, down to like fashion and skincare that are so clearly brand driven. It's about looking around and asking yourself, like, where can we bring unique value that has never been brought before? And it has to start with product. I firmly believe that. Like, we don't work on businesses that are just doing the exact same thing that someone else has already done, but thinking brand will be the point of difference. Like, if there's no story to tell, we can't do our job. But then it's about asking, okay, the product is differentiated. How do we make sure the brand too is delivering unique value, connecting with people in ways that have never been done before, and making it like worth people's time and attention? Like, I mean, this is a cliche, but time and attention is like so scarce, right? Like, we are so overloaded. And I always try to put myself in the shoes of a consumer, which I am one. I'm a great consumer, one of the best.
Same.
Yeah. And be like, would I care about this? Would this be worth my time? Would this be worth like giving 2 seconds to, 15 seconds to, 60 seconds to? And just always asking, like, how are we bringing something to the table that surpasses people's expectations?
I love that insight that you shared around that differentiator being product driven, because I think so much of branding obviously needs to complement and help amplify the actual product. But if you are relying solely on the brand to deliver that message and be the differentiator, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle and you're going to lose.
Especially because you cannot have like long-term sustained growth without retention. Like you might get people once, but if you have to keep paying to acquire new customers, like you're going to go out of business eventually. The only way to build like a lasting business is to keep people. And people might get fooled once, but if they buy your product and it's mediocre, it doesn't live up to your promise, like they're not going to do it again. And certainly you're going to be incredibly vulnerable, like when someone else comes along and offers something that's tangibly better.
When we look at categories like luggage, right? Away luggage comes to mind. And they were iconic, also very big in the direct-to-consumer era, where they did have, you know, the hard shell carry-on or whatever the bag was called, which was really novel and cool at the time. And they had like a charger in there. So they had some unique features. But how do you feel about something like luggage in today's world where there isn't all that much that can be really delivered from a product standpoint? Do you believe that there's still an opportunity for a new startup company in the luggage space to really do well, even if the product isn't in itself all that differentiated?
I'm an eternal optimist, probably to a fault. I always believe there's a chance to improve on what came before. And, you know, is it about the luggage itself? Maybe. I would think probably. Like right now, we're like, oh, how could luggage get any better? But even just a few years ago, we didn't have like the four wheels that you could, you know, roll it upright. And when I was a kid, we didn't have wheels at all. So I'm like, when I was a child, but like, you know, lugging my, you know, horrible duffel through the airport, like asking my parents if we could check our bags.
Embarrassingly, I did not have a four-wheel bag until like very recently, and my husband would continuously drag me on it, and I just upgraded and it is life-changing.
It's amazing. And yes, no, the four-wheel bag is an incredible innovation. So my point is, I think there's probably product innovation that could come, but there are also other ways to innovate. Customer service is a huge opportunity. Is there a service layer that could be added on top of a luggage brand that creates a better travel experience? I mean, I'm making that up, but like, you know, like I just think that there's so many points along the way of a trip where somebody's experience could be slightly better. And like, why not a luggage brand to come and step in and like make one small part of that literal journey more pleasant for people, whatever that might look like, you know? And to me, that would be a story to tell, a reason, and, you know, design too, right? Like design can be an innovation and it doesn't necessarily have to have a functional benefit attached to it. Like, I think that you could come out with a luggage brand that just like looks incredibly cool. Maybe it's about patterns. Maybe it's about, you know, the shape of the handle, whatever it might be. And that creates delight for people. And I think that counts. Like, I don't think a benefit always has to be this like very functional, you know, tangible thing. Sometimes it's just about creating a feeling that didn't exist before.
I think that's a really interesting take on this. And I didn't think of it like that with taking customer service, or even if we're going back to luggage, warranties, right? Like there are differentiators that you can make that are perhaps more on the service side that aren't directly related to design.
100%.
So I'm really curious about this next topic. How does AI fit into the future of branding and agencies?
I haven't talked about AI at all. I think that we would be the greatest fools in the world to be ignoring AI right now. Again, I'm an optimist. There have certainly been people who have, you know, espoused the opinion that like AI is going to kill creative agencies because, you know, in not so far in the future, someone will be able to just like put the inputs in and AI will spit out a brand, right? My take on that is that branding only has comparative value. There's no intrinsic value to a brand. It only matters in terms of looking better and being better than your competition. So if everybody has access to those exact same tools, then you'll need to find another way to differentiate. And I think that's where like human ingenuity will still play a role. It's like, okay, we've all got these tools. It might make it faster. It might make it cheaper. But then it's going to be strategic thinking of how we use them and how we continue to outpace and stand out from the crowd that will lead to success for client businesses. In terms of how it's going to influence our business, I mean, I think probably in every way possible, right? I think it's going to be introduced across like every work stream. I think people are already starting to see the power of it and figure out ways that it can like make things faster or, you know, help with content production when budgets are low. I mean, you name it, right? I think we've barely scratched the surface.
I agree with you. I think AI is impacting virtually every industry in the world right now. And I think it's a question of how to harness the power of AI while still using human mental capacity for the more creative elements and positioning. To me, that seems like the human element, you never want to lose that human element. And actually, even earlier today, when I was on Instagram, I got served a post that had example mock-ups that AI had done for these tier one luxury brands, the Hermes quality brands of the world. And the one common thread was all of them looked pretty soulless. And reading through the comment section was hilarious because everyone is like, this is devoid of any life. This is so boring. And I think that AI is powerful, but I'm also an internal optimist, and I would like to believe that there's always going to be a very critical role that humans play in anything design or creative.
I agree. And like, look, it's going to keep getting better. It's going to get better at not looking soulless too, but it's inherently derivative. Mm-hmm. So if the whole notion is that it's sort of like scraping the world's knowledge to, you know, come up with recommendations, how do you get somewhere new? You know, my friends and I were playing around after the Oscars where we were like having AI come up with script ideas. And like the movies it came up with were like kind of good, but like so cliched. Mm-hmm. Like it's like, I was like, oh, I'd watch this movie because it's a movie I've seen 100 times before. But like you don't get a movie like Honora out of AI.
This is going to be a tough question for you. And so I'm not going to ask you for one. I'll ask you for potentially several. But can you name some of your favorite design projects to date?
This is an impossible question. You're asking me to name my favorite kid. I will just go with like recency bias because I really do fall in love with everything we work on. So for me, like each time I'm like drinking the Kool-Aid and I'm like, this is the greatest product in the world. And like our brand is so wonderful. But recently we launched a Labna brand called Bezzy that's really going up against hummus. You know, I think it's so interesting to think about the fact that like hummus was not part of the mainstream American palate diet, like grocery shop, not that long ago. And Bezzy, you know, it's also has Middle Eastern roots. It's this incredible like dairy dip that you can like dip a chip in. You can put it on a sandwich. It's absolutely delicious. The founder, she's amazing. She's from Turkey. So there's like a real authenticity to it, but she also wanted to do something like very fresh and new that would like pop on the shelf, especially people who aren't even like looking for this thing that they probably never heard of and don't know how to pronounce. So that was just a really fun challenge. And right now she's still just local in New York, but the growth has been just unbelievable.
Ooh, I'm excited to check it out.
It's so good.
Going to the last section of the pod, these are the final 3 questions. Can you share a system or framework that you have in place that benefits your career or business?
My framework is that you have to carve out leisure time that is not directly related to your field. I love business podcasts and I love, you know, learning more about what's happening in my industry, but I also think it's so important to feed your mind with outside influences. So for example, like I read fiction, like literature, like almost every night, the last thing I do is I'm reading a novel that has nothing to do with like what I was working on all day. But I think it actually expands my mind more than if I were just like in an echo chamber, only reading about what's happening in branding and tech and startups. So yeah, that's really, really important to me. And I think part of that too is just about creating clear boundaries, which is obviously incredibly hard as a business owner. But like there's a certain point in the night where like I am going offline. I am not checking my email. I'm not checking my phone. I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to watch something on TV that has nothing to do with my work, spend time with my family, and like just be done for the day.
I love that. And I think I also follow a very similar practice, because you can't just be working, sleep, get up and go back to your phone first thing in the morning. You need a break. And usually I find in the breaks, that's when I get these bouts of creative inspiration or ideas. So you desperately need them, especially if you're in a creative field.
100%. It's so interesting to me. Like if I'm trying to come up with a name for a business and I'm on the subway and I'm like sitting there trying to like think of the name, I never succeed. But if I like put my phone away and just like absorb the world around me, like suddenly the idea hits.
The next question comes from the social currency corner, where I get your input on a trending topic that's impacting business and culture. So I actually have two for you. And one I thought of this morning, and the other one was pre-prepared. So in Red Antler's State of Brand report, it mentions Crumble cookies and how they use their user-generated content, or UGC, to identify quality issues and get feedback. So what can other brands learn from Crumble's approach?
This might be cliched, but the more brands can embrace the fact that like branding today is a two-way street and a conversation. And like people have been saying that for a long time. Like that's not a new idea, but the access that brands have to their customers and vice versa is unprecedented. And I think you can either see that as like this huge challenging thing, like how are we possibly going to manage this? Or you can see that as like the greatest opportunity, because brands 20 years ago would have killed to be able to like literally talk to their consumers anytime live. Like people used to pay millions of dollars for that degree of like insight and data, and now it's just readily available. So I think brands need to just like see that as their absolute most powerful marketing channel.
I love that. And for the second topic, I want to talk about the Duolingo brand and company absolute mayhem and madness. So do you recommend that brands take on this type of approach on social media?
Not in a blanket way.
Makes sense.
I think that like the greatest mistake a brand could make is like looking at Duolingo and the attention that they're getting and being like, we're going to do that too, without asking like what makes sense specifically for them. And that is on so many factors. What category you're in, who are your consumers, what are they looking for from you? Do they want to hear from you in this way? Do you have the right people on the team to like execute this? Like that's huge too. Like you could have the greatest idea, but like if you don't have the right person that can actually continue to pull it off with the right tone, you're going to fall so flat on your face.
Okay, for our final question, I want to end with some advice. So I ask the audience for their questions to ask you, and this is one that I thought was really interesting. So I'm launching a clothing brand later this year, and I'm looking for an agency partner to help level up our branding so that we make a splash when we launch. What are some good questions I should be asking prospective branding agencies to understand which one would be the best fit for my company?
I love that question. First, I think it's about track record, but I want to clarify. I think it's a huge mistake to try to find an agency that has done the exact thing that you're trying to do. And sometimes we'll have prospective clients come to us and they're like, can you show me a case study that like hits this, and this point? And we're like, if we had already done this, why would we do it again? So I think you want to see case studies that sort of get at different aspects of your challenge in different ways, but you shouldn't be looking for a direct comp, because I'd be nervous to work with an agency that like only does the same thing over and over again. So that's one. I think going deeper on just like process and way of working, and it's not like there's a right or a wrong way, but more like what's going to gel with you. Like, is this a founder that wants to be like super in the weeds, like really involved? What style of collaboration is going to like meet this founder's expectations for how involved they'll be in the process? So I think just going deeper on like how the sausage gets made and seeing if it aligns with your expectations. And then I would ask, like, what does success look like? And where have things gone wrong? And how do you like do your best to mitigate that? Because I think that can be an incredibly revealing conversation.
Emily, thank you so much for this conversation. You can find Emily and Red Antler on socials. I'll link the handles in the show notes. And please read her book, Obsessed, Building a Brand People Love from Day One. Emily, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. I've been wanting to launch this show for so long. I can't tell you how excited I am to do this and how thrilled I am that you're actually here listening. It means the world to me. If you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast because it massively helps to support the work I do to bring the show to life. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammi Cohen Talks and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, which is linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammi Cohen. Social Currency is produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.